There is a particular kind of lie that doesn't sound like one. My name is Marcus Webb, and for 14 years I heard it every morning. Not in the dark, not whispered in the middle of the night when the defenses are down and people say things they don't mean, but at the breakfast table, in the full light of a Tuesday or a Thursday, over coffee and toast, and the sound of our son Caleb eating cereal too loudly the way he always did. I love you. 3 words. Words, same voice, same small smile behind them. Delivered with a consistency that I took for certainty. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my professional life finding the gap between what numbers said and what numbers meant. I was good at it. I could read a balance sheet the way other men read a room, feeling the temperature of it, sensing where things didn't add up, following the faint trail of something concealed. I did not apply any of that to my wife. I want to say that up front, before anything else. Because this story is not just about what Simone did. It is also about what I didn't do, and what I chose not to see, and the specific blindness of a man who is very good at finding other people's hidden truths and very practiced at ignoring his own. Carver Falls, Indiana is not the kind of place where dramatic things happen. It's a college town. Harwick University sits on its north end like a grandfather who's been there longer than the town itself. And the streets are wide and tree-lined, and in the summer the whole place smells of cut grass and the kind of quiet that makes people from cities uncomfortable. We had moved here 12 years ago when Simone got the teaching position at Carver Falls High. I transferred my practice, set up an office on Dellen Street, and settled in with the ease of a man who doesn't require much from a place except that it stays still. We had Caleb 3 years after the move. He was 11 now, dark-haired and serious and possessed of the particular intensity of children who notice everything and comment on less than they've absorbed. He ate his cereal too loudly, and he left his shoes at the bottom of the stairs, and he was the best thing in my life, and he knew it and did not abuse the knowledge. The morning I'm thinking of, the one I keep returning to as the true beginning, though I understand now that beginnings are rarely where we place them, was a Wednesday in late September. The kitchen smelled of coffee and the specific autumn light that comes through our east-facing window in a long flat band across the counter. Simone stood at the sink rinsing her mug, dressed for school in the dark green blouse I'd always liked on her, and she turned as I came in and said it the way she always said it. Not loudly, not with particular emphasis, just warmly and without ceremony. I love you. Her phone was on the counter. Screen up. That was normal, always had been. No deliberate concealment. Nothing turned over or hidden. Just a phone, screen up, the way a person's phone sits when they have nothing to hide. I kissed her on the cheek and poured coffee and asked Caleb if he'd finished his math homework, and the morning moved forward the way mornings did. And I did not know that her phone held 17 unread messages from a man named Nate, and that she had been not reading them in my presence for the better part of 3 months, and that this particular restraint, the discipline of not reaching for it while I was in the room, was the closest thing to a love language she had developed for me in the last 2 years of our marriage. I found that out later. I'm getting there. What I want you to understand first is the texture of that morning. How real it felt. How ordinary. How the coffee tasted the same as it always did, and the light came through the window the same way, and Caleb complained about his math with the same theatrics, and Simone laughed at him the same way, and I stood in my kitchen in Carver Falls, Indiana, and felt, without reservation or qualification, that I was a man whose life was in order. I had been feeling that for years. The ordered life. The functioning marriage. 14 years, 1 son, 1 house on Greer Street with a porch we never used, and a backyard Caleb had colonized entirely with whatever project currently consumed him. This year, an elaborate system of bird feeders he designed and built himself, which I was unreasonably proud of. We were not a passionate couple, Simone and I. I think we both knew that, though we'd never said it. We were a steady couple, a comfortable one. We moved through the shared life with the ease of 2 people who have learned each other's rhythms and adapted to them without friction. Comfort, I have since learned, can be its own kind of warning sign. She left for school at 7:40. I heard the door, heard her car, and then it was quiet except for Caleb still upstairs and the house settling into its morning sounds. I stood at the counter with my second coffee, and I looked at the place where her phone had been. She'd taken it, of course, always took it, and I felt nothing in particular. That was the problem, I think. That was the thing I should have examined. Not the phone, not the messages I didn't know about yet, but the fact that I stood in the kitchen after my wife left and I felt nothing in particular, and I called that normal, and I went to work. Simone had been teaching art at Carver Falls High for 12 years by the time this story catches up to itself. She was good at it. I knew this not from watching her teach, which I rarely did, but from the way her students talked about her at the handful of school events I attended. They had a specific quality of attention when she spoke. Not the polite attention students give a teacher they respect, something warmer. She had the gift of making people feel that what they were doing mattered, that the thing in their hands was worth the time they were giving it. I wonder now how long it had been since I'd given her that feeling. She'd started going to a weekly drawing group at the Harwick Arts Building about 8 months before that September morning. An informal thing. Faculty, some graduate students, a few community members who paid a small fee to participate. Life drawing. She explained when she mentioned it. She'd been wanting to get back to her own practice. She said, not just teaching it. I said that sounded great. I meant it. I said it and moved on and did not ask again for weeks. Nate was in that group. I learned this later, but I want to place it here in the chronology where it belongs. Nate Carver, no relation to the town, a coincidence he apparently found amusing, was 42, freelance photographer, recently separated from a woman he'd been with for 7 years. He'd moved to Carver Falls to take a visiting artist position at Harwick for the academic year. He had, by all accounts, a talent for sustained attention, for looking at things carefully and reflecting that care back at people. Simone had not been looked at carefully in a long time. I know that now. I knew it then in the way you know things you've decided not to examine. A formless, peripheral awareness, not quite acknowledged, not quite buried. My work in those months was demanding in the specific way forensic accounting can get. A case involving a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Indianapolis that had been quietly rerouting funds through subsidiary accounts for 11 years. The kind of case that requires total attention, weeks of careful, painstaking reconstruction, following the money through layers of intentional obfuscation. I was good at it, and I was absorbed by it, and I came home most evenings with my mind still in the spreadsheets. Simone would ask about the case with what I took for genuine interest, and I would give her the broad strokes. And she would listen and ask a follow-up question, and I would answer it. And then we would talk about Caleb's school or the weekend or something practical, and the evening would pass. I'm not describing neglect, exactly. I was present. I showed up. I ate dinner with my family and helped Caleb with homework and watched television with my wife and went to bed beside her. But there is a difference between being present and being attentive, and I had lost track of where that line was, or whether I was still on the right side of it. She started staying later at the Arts Building some Thursdays. The drawing group ran from 7 to 9, she said, but sometimes they'd go for a drink after. The group had become a kind of social thing, she explained, which was nice. She didn't get out enough. I agreed that she didn't. I said I was glad she'd found something she enjoyed. What I should have noticed, the particular lightness she carried on Thursday mornings. The way she moved through the kitchen differently on those days. Not nervous, not guilty. Not anything that would have triggered alarm, just slightly more alive. A degree of warmth she didn't always have on other mornings. I noticed it the way you notice a change in the light when a cloud moves, registering it without naming it, filing it away without examining it. My colleague Dree mentioned it, actually, not directly. Dree Okafor had worked with me for 6 years, sharp, perceptive, the kind of woman who notices things quietly and stores them without comment until the moment they become relevant. We'd grabbed lunch one Friday, and she'd said, in the way she said things that were actually observations, Simone seems really engaged lately. I saw her at the farmer's market with a bunch of people from Harwick. She looked good. I'd said yes. She'd gotten back into her art practice, which was good for her. Dree had looked at me briefly, just a flicker, and said, yeah, and changed the subject. I have replayed that moment. I think she was deciding whether to say something else and decided against it. I understand why. It was not her place. And honestly, I am not sure what I would have done with it. The Indianapolis case broke in early November. I found the key discrepancy on a Thursday evening, stayed late at the office, 3 hours longer than I'd planned, the way these things always go when you're close to something. I called Simone to say I'd be late. She said fine. She was at the drawing group anyway. Caleb was at home. Mrs. Ellard next door was keeping an eye. Everything in order. I wrapped up at the office around 9:30 and drove home through the November dark. And when I turned onto Greer Street, I noticed a car I didn't recognize idling at the end of the block. Dark SUV, engine running. Not remarkable. The street was public, but as I turned into my driveway, I caught, in the periphery of my headlights, the car pulling away. And something in the particular quiet of that movement, unhurried, deliberate, as if the act of leaving was something the driver had been rehearsing, lodged itself somewhere in my attention. I went inside. Caleb was asleep. Simone wasn't home yet. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table and worked through some notes from the case and told myself I was imagining things. She came home at 10:15, a little later than usual. She was in good spirits, loose, warm, the particular ease of someone who has had a good evening and is still inside the feeling of it. She asked about the case. We talked for 20 minutes. She went up to shower, and I sat in the kitchen a little longer with my tea going cold, and I thought, very quietly and without drama, that something was different. Not wrong. Different. I filed it away. That was my habit. My very practiced, very dangerous habit. December brought the cold that makes Carver Falls beautiful in a way that requires you to have grown up with Indiana winters to appreciate. The trees go silver, and the streets go quiet, and the town takes on a kind of stillness that is either peaceful or melancholy, depending on where you're standing inside your own life. I was standing somewhere I couldn't quite locate. The drawing group had gone on hiatus for the holidays, Simone mentioned in early December. She seemed unaffected by this, not relieved, not disappointed, just matter of fact. The group would reconvene in January. I noted this and noted that I didn't know what to do with the noting, which was becoming a familiar sensation. What changed in December was subtler than anything I could have pointed to if someone had asked me directly. It was a quality of attention. Simone was attentive to me. Actively, warmly attentive, in a way that felt, and I am choosing this word carefully, like effort. Not inauthentic, but conscious. As if she had decided to be present with me and was honoring that decision with intention. The kisses in the morning had a different weight. The I love yous came with maintained eye contact, where before they'd been a kind of reflexive warmth offered while she was already moving on to the next thing. I'm aware that this sounds like I'm describing a woman trying to repair her marriage. I think that's exactly what it was. She was trying to hold two things at once, and the effort of it was showing in her care. I didn't understand it then. I felt it, and I called it a good patch, the kind that comes around in long marriages, the seasons of warmth that follow the cooler stretches. I leaned into it. I took Simone to dinner at the Italian place on Howard Street that we never went to because we always meant to. I bought her a book about a photographer she'd mentioned admiring. I came to bed earlier and left my phone on my desk. It was, in a real sense, the best month we'd had together in 2 years. And underneath it, invisible to me, she was deciding something. The drawing group reconvened in January. She went back on the second Thursday of the month, and when she came home, there was something different in her again, not the loose warmth of before. Something more careful, a quietness that she was carrying with deliberate control. I asked her about it directly, which surprised me as much as it might have surprised her. I was in the kitchen when she came in, waiting up, though I hadn't admitted to myself that was what I was doing. And I looked at her and said, "Everything okay?" She set her bag down and looked at me with an expression I have thought about many times since. It was not guilt, exactly. It was something more complicated, a grief, almost. As if she had been hoping for a different conversation, and this was the closest available. "Fine," she said. "Tired." It was a long session. Good tired or bad tired? She looked at me for a moment. "What do you mean? Like, was it a good night? Did you make something you were happy with?" Something shifted in her face. Small. A loosening, almost. "Yeah," she said more quietly. "I actually did. We talked for a while after that. Really talked. Not the administrative exchange, not the this and that of shared logistics." She showed me a photo on her phone of a charcoal piece she'd done that evening. A figure study, loose and confident, with a quality of movement in the lines that was genuinely striking. I told her it was good and I meant it, and she looked at me as if she were deciding whether to trust the compliment. I think that was the closest we came to saving things without knowing that was what we were doing. But I hadn't changed in any fundamental way. I had shown up for one conversation and felt good about it. The next evening, I was back in the Indianapolis case. There were depositions coming, and I was deep in the documentation. And the evening after that, Caleb needed help with a school project, and Simone and I passed each other in the kitchen the way people pass each other in a house that has been a home for so long that proximity doesn't require contact. The call started showing up on the phone bill in February. I do the finances. I have always done the finances. It was never a control issue, just competence and habit, the same way I do the taxes and Simone handles the social calendar and school forms. The bill arrived as a PDF, the way it always did, and I was checking it against the previous months, looking for a charge I needed to document for a business expense, and I saw a number I didn't recognize. Not alarming in volume. For calls in February, 3 in January, each one between 2 and 12 minutes long. My immediate thought was the drawing group. One of the Harwick people, a contact she'd made. This was completely plausible. She had made friends there. My second thought came and went quickly. I should ask her about it. My third thought, the one I acted on, was to note it and continue what I was doing. A forensic accountant who spots an anomaly in someone else's books follows it. A husband who spots one in his own life apparently goes back to work. I'm not going to be kind to myself about that. The number appeared again in March. More frequently, 7 calls, and a pattern that I couldn't have told you I noticed, but that I absorbed regardless. Evenings, primarily, and always on days when Simone had been at the arts building. The day after the drawing group, sometimes. As if whatever happened on Thursdays needed a continuation. My brother Len called me in March for his monthly check-in. Len was 47 and lived in Cincinnati and had been through a divorce 6 years ago with an honesty that had cost him a lot and clarified him considerably. We talked about his kids, my work, Caleb's birds. And then he said, in the way Len said things he'd been holding for a while, "How are things with Simone?" "Really good," I said. "We had a good December." "And January?" I paused. "Fine. Normal." He was quiet for a moment. "You know you can tell me if something's off." "Nothing's off," I said. And then, "I don't know. Maybe I've been distracted with the case." "Maybe she has too," Len said. And the way he said it, not accusatory, not leading, just quiet, made me put the phone bill in a different mental folder. I did not tell Len about the number I didn't recognize. I told myself there was nothing to tell. But that night, I lay in bed and I listened to Simone's breathing beside me, and I thought about the forensic axiom that I had taught to young associates at every firm I'd ever worked at. Follow the anomaly. Every anomaly is a message. The question is whether you want to know what it says. I had been not wanting to know what it said for months. The question was how much longer I could sustain that. I looked up the number on a Tuesday in April from my office, with the door closed. It took 40 seconds. A name came back immediately, not from a reverse lookup, which would have taken longer, but from a Harwick University faculty page that appeared in the first search result. The visiting artist position. A headshot. A biography. Nate Carver. Photographer. Year-long residency at Harwick. I sat with the screen in front of me, and I felt the specific sensation I recognized from my professional life as the moment before clarity. Not clarity itself, but its threshold, the last moment of genuine uncertainty before the picture assembles itself into something you can't reassemble back into ambiguity. I did not do anything with it for 3 days. This is the part one find hardest to explain, and also the part one understand most clearly in retrospect. I had the name. I had the pattern. I had the phone bill and the late Thursdays and the darkened car on my street in November and Dree's careful flicker across the lunch table. I had enough to confront. I had more than enough to confirm. And I sat on it for 3 days because I was afraid. Not of what I'd find. Of what confirming it would require me to do. That is the truth of it. I am a man who tracks other people's hidden money and uncovers their deliberate deceptions and testifies about fraud in depositions with complete calm. In my professional life, finding the hidden thing is the job. In my personal life, I had organized everything around not finding it. I think about what that says about me. I think about it often. On the 4th day, I drove past the arts building on Harwick's campus. I told myself it was on my way to a client meeting, which it was, loosely, if I took the long way. The Thursday drawing group. 7 to 9. I drove past at 8:15 and I saw Simone's car in the lot. And parked 2 spaces from it, a dark SUV. I kept driving. That evening I went through 3 months of her public social media. Not her private messages. I want to be clear about that. I never went into her phone or her accounts. Just what was visible. There wasn't much. She didn't post often. But in the Harwick Arts Building's Instagram, which was public, I found a photo from a group exhibition in February. A cluster of people around artwork. Simone was in it, laughing at something, her posture open and unguarded in a way I couldn't remember seeing in a photograph of her for years. Beside her, slightly blurred, was a man I recognized from the faculty page. I closed the laptop and I went upstairs and I looked in on Caleb, who was asleep with a book on his chest, and I stood in the doorway of his room for longer than I needed to. The next morning, Simone made coffee and turned from the sink and looked at me with that practiced warmth, that morning warmth, the ritual of it. And she said, "I love you." And I looked at her and I said it back. And I meant it. And I think she meant it too. And those two truths were not contradictory, which was the thing about this particular situation that I had the least capacity to hold. I called Dree from my car after I dropped Caleb at school. "I need to ask you something," I said. "And I need you to be straight with me." A pause. "Okay. At the farmer's market, when you saw Simone with the Harwood people." I kept my voice measured. "Was there a man with her? Tall, dark hair, probably early 40s. The pause this time was different in quality. Longer. "Marcus," she said. "Just tell me." "Yes," she said. "There was someone like that. They were," she stopped. "They were close. And how they were standing. I didn't know who he was." I thanked her. She said my name again, with the particular weight of a person who wants to say more and is waiting for the invitation. I didn't give it to her. I had what I needed. That evening I asked Simone directly. We were in the kitchen after dinner, Caleb upstairs, the house quiet, the April evening coming through the window over the sink. I had thought about where and how and decided there was no ideal version of this. There was only asking, "Is something going on with someone from the drawing group?" I said. She was drawing a plate. She did not drop it. She set it down very carefully on the counter, and she turned and she looked at me with an expression that was not surprise. Relief, maybe. The relief of something that has been held for a long time finally being set down. "What do you mean?" she said. But she said it without force. It was a question looking for a lifeline, not a challenge. "Nate Carver," I said. The name landed between us like something dropped from a height. She closed her eyes. What followed had the quality of an event that has been building for so long that when it finally arrives, it carries the stillness of inevitability rather than the chaos of surprise. She didn't perform denial. That was the first thing. She opened her eyes and she looked at me and she said, "How long have you known?" "Longer than I acted on it," I said. That honesty seemed to cost her something. Not comfort, but the shelter of a simpler story. If I had accused her in anger, she would have had anger to meet. My steadiness gave her nothing to push against. "Since when?" I asked. "How long?" "October." A pause. "The drawing group." We talked, the first few weeks. And then it became, she stopped. "I didn't plan it, Marcus." "I know people don't plan it," I said. "That's not what I'm asking." "He paid attention to me," she said. And then, as if hearing herself, "I know how that sounds. Tell me anyway." She sat down at the kitchen table. I stayed standing. Not to have height over her, just because I couldn't sit. My body needed to remain upright in a way I couldn't explain. "You're a good man," she said. "I've always known that. But I stopped feeling like a person to you. Not a function. Not a mother. A person. Someone you were curious about." She looked at her hands. "I can't remember the last time you asked me what I was thinking about. Not what I needed to do, or what Caleb needed, or how the week looked. What I was actually thinking." I stood with that. She was right. I knew she was right even before she said it, which was the thing I had been most afraid of discovering. The confirmation that this was not a simple story of a woman who had betrayed a blameless man, but a more complicated story about two people who had failed each other in asymmetric ways. Her failure visible and devastating, mine invisible and slow and foundational. "Did you love him?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. "I felt seen by him," she said finally. "I don't know if that's the same thing." "Did you sleep with him?" "Yes." No hesitation. She had decided to give me the truth, and she gave it. The strange thing, and I have thought about this more than I can easily express, is that in that moment I felt something clarify rather than shatter. As if the information, as painful as it was, had resolved a tension that had been accumulating for months and left something cleaner in its place. Not relief, exactly, but the particular stillness of finally knowing the thing you've been trying not to know. "Is it over?" I asked. She looked at me. "The physical. I ended that in January. After Christmas." A pause. "But we've still been talking." "I know that doesn't." "Why did you end it?" She looked at her hands again. "Because of December," she said quietly. "Because of the dinner at Howard Street. And the book you bought me. Because you started showing up again, and I remembered why I loved you. and I felt ashamed. Not because of the rules of it, because of what it meant about what we'd let happen. She looked up. I have been trying to find my way back for months, Marcus. I don't know if that matters. I said nothing for a moment. It matters, I said. It doesn't fix it, but it matters. We talked for 3 hours that night. Not the whole of it. Not the complete archaeology of what had gone wrong, and when and how and whose fault and what proportion, but the beginning of it, the shape of it. I told her that I had been absent in the ways she'd named. Not intentionally cruel, but absent, and the effect was the same regardless of the intention. She told me that she should have said something, should have told me she was disappearing rather than going looking for something to replace what was missing. We agreed that the truth of a long marriage is that it takes effort from two directions and that we had both stopped pushing in equal measure and that the distance had grown in the dark. We did not decide anything that night about the future. We were both too honest to manufacture a decision neither of us was ready to make. Caleb heard something, not our voices, but the fact of them, the late hour, the kitchen light on past midnight. He appeared at the top of the stairs in his pajamas and said, "Is everything okay?" I looked up at him. "Come down," I said. He came down, and I put my arm around him at the kitchen table, and I said, "Your mom and I are working through some stuff. It's grown-up stuff. But you're okay, and we both love you, and nothing about that changes." He looked between us with those dark, careful eyes. "Are you going to get divorced?" "We don't know yet," Simone said. Her voice was steady. I was grateful for that. He nodded, accepted it with the gravity of a child who has decided to trust the people telling him the truth. Went back upstairs. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room. I'd moved there without drama. We both understood it was necessary. And I looked at the ceiling, and I tried to locate exactly what I felt. Betrayal. Yes, the specific, hollow ache of it. But also something else. A reckoning with myself that had been waiting for longer than this crisis. A confrontation with the version of me that had chosen comfort and routine and professional distance over the sustained effort of being genuinely present with another person. I had been so good at finding other people's hidden truths. I had spent 14 years not finding my own. We tried. I want to be honest about that. We went to a couples therapist, Dr. Paula Shun, who had an office above the pharmacy on Dellen Street in a manner of directness that I found both uncomfortable and necessary. We went every Thursday for 3 months. We had conversations in that office that we should have been having in our own kitchen for years. Simone told me things she'd never said. I told her things I'd never said. It was, in its strange way, the most intimate 3 months of our marriage. And at the end of it, we both understood that what we'd uncovered was not the thing that would save us. It was the thing that explained us. Understanding the architecture of a failure is not the same as repairing it. The feelings we'd excavated, the genuine care, the history, the love that had not entirely gone but had grown quiet and unfamiliar, were real. But they were not enough, in the end, to rebuild something we'd each already quietly let go. We told Caleb on a Sunday in July. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, and we told him that we had decided to separate, that this was something both of us had chosen together because we believed it was better than the alternative. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if he could still have both his bird feeders, one at each house, when we had 2 houses. We said yes. He nodded and asked if he could go outside. We watched him walk out to the backyard and stand for a moment looking at his feeders with the particular stillness of a child processing something he doesn't yet have language for. Simone moved into a place on Harwick's west side in August. A 1-bedroom with good light, she said, which mattered for her work. She had started painting again, not just the drawing group work, but real painting, large canvases, the thing she'd set aside when life got organized around function. I was glad for that. I meant it without ambivalence. Nate Carver's visiting residency ended in May. He left Carver Falls and, as far as I know, did not return. Simone never mentioned him to me after the initial conversations, and I did not ask. That chapter had been a symptom of something larger, and treating it as the cause would have been the kind of accounting error I'd trained myself to avoid. The twist in this story, the thing I haven't told you yet, came in September. Caleb had been going back and forth between us for 2 months, adjusting to the rhythm of it with the resilience that had always been his defining characteristic. He was with Simone on a Thursday when he found something. A box in her closet while looking for a soccer ball she'd said was in there. An old shoebox, the kind that holds photographs. He brought it to me the next weekend with the solemnity of a person carrying something important, which he was. I found these at Mom's, he said. I think you should look at them. Inside were photographs, printed on actual paper, which was unusual enough to be notable, taken over what appeared to be several years. I could tell by the progression in them, the aging of faces, the different haircuts. They were photographs of us, Simone and me, from years I'd half forgotten. Our first apartment in Columbus, a road trip we'd taken before Caleb was born, early years in Carver Falls. And in all of them, every single one, Simone was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, something more specific than that. She was looking at me the way I had apparently never thought to look back. The photographs were not dated, but the latest ones appeared to be from 4 or 5 years ago. She had stopped printing them or stopped saving them around the time. I did not have to do much calculation that we had started drifting. As if she had kept this record of something she was watching slowly disappear and at some point had decided to stop recording the disappearance. I sat with those photographs for a long time. I called Dree that evening, not about the photographs, just to talk, the way we had started doing more often since the separation. She was easy to talk to. She had known me for 6 years in the way that colleagues who share difficult work come to know each other. Not everything, but the real parts, the parts that show under pressure. We had been having dinners, the two of us, since August. I had been careful about what I called them, what I allowed myself to acknowledge them as, because I was 2 months out of a marriage and I was aware of the danger of looking for replacement heat before the cold had been properly absorbed. But I called her that evening and I described the photographs, and she listened with her particular quality of attention, not rushing to fill silence, not offering the reflexive comfort that closes a conversation instead of opening it. And she said, "What do you feel, looking at them?" I thought about it. "Sad," I said. "And something else. I think I see something in them that I should have been paying attention to. The whole time." "Yeah," she said quietly. "I was so sure I knew the shape of my marriage," I said. "And the whole time there was this whole interior of it that I wasn't looking at." "You were looking," Dree said. "You just kept looking away." That was accurate enough that I didn't have a response to it for a while. "I don't want to do that again," I said finally. "I know," she said. We talked for 2 more hours. At the end of the call, she said, "Marcus, for what it's worth, you're looking now." I have held on to that. Not as an absolution. I'm too much of an accountant for that. Too accustomed to the idea that the numbers don't get to just reset, that what is owed regardless of what comes after. But as something true, you can spend years choosing the comfortable interpretation, and one day you stop choosing it, and that is not nothing. Dree and I had dinner the following Friday at the Italian place on Howard Street, which was no longer Simone's and mine, but simply a restaurant on a street in the town where I lived. And over that dinner, something shifted between us in a way that we both acknowledged carefully, with the specific care of 2 people who understand what it costs to get things wrong and who are therefore not rushing. I don't know where it goes. I don't have that kind of certainty about anything anymore, which I think might be an improvement. What I know is this. I am 44 years old, and I live in a small house across town from the woman I was married to for 14 years and down the street from my son's school. I pick up Caleb on Tuesdays and Fridays and every other weekend, and he fills my house with the particular noise and energy of a child who is fundamentally okay, who has a bird feeder in every place he calls home, who is adapting with a grace that astonishes me. I have started leaving the Indianapolis case at the office when I come home. I have started asking people what they're actually thinking. I have started being curious, in a deliberate and sustained way, about the interior lives of the people I care about, not as information to be gathered and filed, but as the actual substance of closeness. I was a forensic accountant who was very good at finding gaps in other people's numbers and very practiced at ignoring the gaps in his own. I know that about myself now with a clarity I didn't have a year ago. The morning ritual, the breakfast table, the coffee, the 3 words offered across the ordinary surface of a day. I have thought about that ritual many times since everything changed. What I've come to is not cynicism. I don't believe the words were hollow. I believe they were real and also, simultaneously, a kind of pressure valve, a way of honoring something that was under strain, of keeping a hand on something that was slipping. She said them and meant them, and they were not enough, because words across a table don't replace the attention that should have been underneath them all along. Caleb asked me once, a few months after we told him, whether I thought his mom and I would ever be friends again. Not together. He understood that part. Friends. I told him I thought so. That it would take time, but that I thought so. He nodded and said, "Good. Because she still talks about you like she likes you." I didn't know what to say to that. I said, "I like her too, but." He went back to his book, turned the page. Absolute confidence that this was enough information, that the world was comprehensible, that things would sort themselves into reasonable shapes if you gave them time. He's not wrong, I think. He's not wrong. There is a particular failure mode in long marriages that this story illustrates with quiet precision. Not the dramatic unraveling, not the sudden rupture, but the slow and almost imperceptible erosion of genuine attention. Marcus and Simone did not fall out of love, exactly. They fell out of curiosity. And curiosity, it turns out, is not a luxury in a relationship. It is load-bearing infrastructure. Marcus spent 14 years being competent and present and deeply, professionally skilled at identifying the gap between what numbers claim and what they mean, and he applied precisely none of that skill to the person sleeping beside him. This is not hypocrisy, exactly. It's something more human. We tend to apply our greatest capabilities to the domains where we feel safest deploying them, where the stakes of being wrong are professional rather than personal, where finding the hidden truth is a job description rather than a threat to everything we've built. Marcus knew, on some level, that there was something to find. The forensic instinct was always there. He chose not to use it, because using it would have required him to act on what he found. That choice, the choice to not know, is its own kind of betrayal. Not of Simone, but of the marriage itself, and ultimately of himself. Every time he filed away an anomaly, the gas charges, the unrecognized number, the quality of her Thursday energy, the pause in Dree's voice, the car on his street in November, he was making an active decision dressed up as passivity. He was choosing the comfortable interpretation with the full knowledge that it was the comfortable interpretation. That is not innocence. It is a particular form of willful blindness that is easier to forgive than to respect. Simone's story is, in its way, about the tragedy of unspoken need. She had been disappearing. Her sense of self, her creative identity, the feeling of being a person with an interior life rather than a function within a system, for long enough that she could no longer find the language to name it inside the marriage. This is a failure of communication, yes. But it is also a failure that has structural causes. When a relationship's daily vocabulary becomes purely administrative, when the questions are always about logistics and never about inner life, a person starts to believe that their inner life is no longer the relevant subject. They stop trying to bring it up, and then they find somewhere else to bring it. Nate was not the cause of the marriage's failure. He was the moment when the existing failure became visible to someone. He offered Simone the experience of sustained attention, of being truly looked at, and she moved toward it not because she had stopped loving her husband, but because she had forgotten, or been made to forget, that she was someone worth looking at. The photographs Caleb found are the detail that reframes everything. They are evidence that Simone had been aware of the loss, had been recording it, in her way, watching something diminish and keeping a private record of what it had looked like when it was whole. She stopped keeping that record at the approximate moment she stopped fighting for the thing she was recording. There is something in that, in the decision to stop documenting a disappearance, that feels like the true point of no return. Not the affair. The moment she put the photographs away. What the story asks, and refuses to answer simply, is whether any of this was inevitable. Marcus changes, genuinely changes, after the reckoning. He becomes more curious, more present, more willing to sit with discomfort rather than file it away. That change is real, and it comes too late for the marriage, and it is still valuable. The lesson is not that people can't change. It is that change in response to catastrophe, while better than no change at all, is a harder and lonelier version of growth than change in response to love. What stays with me about this story is the shoebox. Not the affair, not the confrontation, not any of the dramatic architecture of the betrayal, but a woman who printed photographs of her husband looking at her the way she wanted to be looked at, and kept them in a box in her closet, and eventually stopped adding to them. That's the detail that goes deepest, because it tells you she knew. She knew what was missing. She had evidence of what it had looked like when it was present. And somewhere in the middle of a marriage that functioned perfectly well on the surface, she stopped believing the evidence still applied. How long do we carry that kind of evidence without showing it to the person who needs to see it? How many of us have a version of that shoebox, a held record of something we once had and stopped asking for? The morning I love you wasn't a lie. It was a habit that had outlived the attention beneath it. That might be the most common tragedy in long relationships. Not that the love disappears, but that it becomes a ritual rather than a practice. Set at the same table, at the same time, over the same coffee, until neither person is quite sure what it's still connected to. You don't need betrayal to ask the question it forces. You can ask it now, before anything breaks. What are they actually thinking? When did you last find out?